Welcome back to the show where we run you through all the Dolphins news you need to know about. After running through the news you need to know about, we run you through the pecuniary answer Vincent's questions. This is going to be a long show. At least I anticipate it being long. Obviously, we're going to start with the news you need to know about. Not a good weekend for Dolphins fans, that's for sure, for many different reasons. Let's start with some of the news that we got over the past 2 days. Teron Armstead and Xavier Howard uncertain about their Dolphins' future. Again, this comes from Pro Football Rumors. Teron obviously contemplating retirement. I'm sure everybody's heard about this. You know, I've said this in the past, even during the season. I think that they should move on from him either way if they can. And retirement might be the best way to part ways in this situation. He missed 7 games with injuries. And even in the games, some of these games he did play, he had to leave the game. So, I think one of the issues, and we're going to get into this, I wrote down everything this team needs to do to get better next season. And one of the bigger ones was just the offensive line needs to be solidified. And we've been talking about it for years, but it's true. The good news is that they have 3 people that they can build around if they wanted to. Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, and Austin Jackson. All 3 are building pieces for sure. But the rest of the offensive line has to be taken into consideration and taken more seriously. Because Tua is a pocket passer. He is not a guy who is going to make plays with his legs. He's just not. And that it has to be one of the most important things in terms of building a team around him to be successful. And again, in another season, and this is something the Dolphins have dealt with for the last 12, 13 years, the offensive line isn't consistent. And honestly, when they were at their best this year, I felt that they were average. They never really were, I think, above that unless they had everybody healthy. But for the most part, they were average, you know. And we'll talk about that more later in the show. But that's something I think that they're going to have to 1,000% take into consideration with Armstead. Is he a guy that we can trust to play 17 games or 14, 16, 15 games in a season? Because we need him to. He can't miss half the year because of the player that we have playing quarterback. And that's an issue that has to be addressed. He's never had a healthy year in his entire career. They have to move on from him. I don't know how they replace him because tackle is such a premium position. And last year would have been a perfect time to do it because there were so many moving parts when it came to the tackle position. I mean, you know, it's not every day Orlando Brown is available to be had. And I was one of the, you know, people who thought they should try to make that deal. I remember when Trent Williams was... It's crazy that Trent Williams was traded for a second-round pick. That's absolutely... One of the best players at his position to ever live was traded for less than Laramie Tunsil was. So there have been opportunities this team has had. Obviously, that was before Mike got here. But my point is when Chris, for whatever reason, at the GM position, other than the Laramie Tunsil pick and the Austin Jackson pick, we need to do more in free agency when it comes to the offensive line, whether that's a trade or a signing. They need to solidify it, and hopefully they can do that this year. I mean, even the Cyrus Torrent, you know, him dropping, that would have been a much better pick than Cam Smith was this year. Now, who knows what Cam Smith turns into, but Cam Smith was a zero. He didn't do anything. He didn't help this team that won 11 games at all, and, you know, someone like that in that round would have helped out a lot. So, and obviously he goes to Buffalo and has a really good rookie season. So that needs to be more of a priority this year. And then Xavier Howard, who, I don't really know where Cam Smith's development is. They have issues at corner, and we're going to discuss that later in the show when we go through the list of things that this team needs to change. But I think that him himself, I hope he comes back for one more season. I don't know how they're going to make that happen. Because clearly they're going to have to clear a cap in some way. But I didn't love the way he said, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be here. It's been great here. You would have loved a little bit more. I mean, he did say either way he's cool with it or whatever. I don't remember exactly the quote, but it wasn't overly enthusiastic for whatever reason. But yeah, he's a player that I would love to have back for sure. He's really important. He's dealt with injuries the last 2 seasons pretty bad. Last year he obviously played through it. This year he couldn't at the end of the season. But he's important to the team, and I would love to see Jalen and X have a healthy year together. And hopefully the team can make that happen. And in other Dolphins news, this actually made me really mad. This reminds me of the Mike Tannenbaum quote, where think of us as a college, and they graduated. And dude, when I'll never forget when he said that in the press. Like, I will never forget it. It made me so upset. This wasn't as bad of a quote, but I mean, Chris Greer was asked about Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt at the press conferences and had the same exact answer. Let me get the exit press conference, end of year press conference. He said this. Yeah, this is what he had to say about Robert Hunt, and he said the same thing about Christian Wilkins. Asked if they have a future here in Miami, if they will be extended. He said, "I am happy for Rob." This is Chris Greer. He got back. I'm happy for Rob. He got back to play at the end of the year for us. Rob has earned the right to be a free agent. We had a conversation with him during the season. We'll see what happens. We would like him to be here. Now, not the most, and to compare that with what he said about Tua, talking about we want him here long term, it was like, why didn't you say that about those two? It just kind of made me a little upset because I love Christian Wilkins a lot. Everybody knows that he has brought this up in many interviews. Obviously he grew up in Massachusetts. I would hate to lose him to New England. I think I would actually lose my mind if that happened. So I really hope he's more of a priority than saying he's earned the right to test free agency. Same thing with Robert Hunt. I love Robert Hunt. He's really played well. I thought he had his best season at guard, minus the injuries. And again, he's a guy that you can build around on the offensive line. And I think he should, if not be more of or equally as important as Christian Wilkins, because of the person we have playing quarterback. And obviously the interior is very important for Tua, and this scheme. And Robert is one of the few people on the team that are dominant run blocker, like can actually consistently push the guy in front of him in a dominant fashion. So I hope those. I hated. I didn't like the quote. I really don't like that. You could have just said, like you said at the end of the quote, we want to extend him. That's all you had to say. You didn't have to say he's earned the right to test free agency. I don't know, something about that quote it didn't set well with me, especially if a corner piece of your franchise. And he talked about the core in this press conference a lot and how confident they are. And if Christian Wilkins isn't a part of that core, then I don't know who is. So I just hope that deal gets done more than anything, because he is such a great player and had a great year. But he's one of the I think for the fan base especially, he's just one of those guys that I think is a building piece for winning future divisional game, obviously Super Bowls. And him saying after the press conference that he wants to be here, I don't know, something about it just makes me a little queasy, and I don't like the feeling of it. I hope that extension comes sooner rather than later, and I hope he doesn't even get to test free agency, because he's first of all, it's a premium position, and he's just such a great player. So I hope that doesn't change, because it would kind of pull the rug out from under the defense. I mean, this is a D-line that broke the franchise record for sacks, and it would be a devastating blow if they couldn't find a way to get a deal done with him. Very, very frustrating, that whole situation. And honestly, the deal should have been done earlier than it was. We have this is something that I wrote down because I thought it was, when brought up it seems like Vic Fangio is going to come back another year. Now, Vic Fangio, who knows, because he's an older, but he hasn't got any buzz for head coaching, and there hasn't been any rumors about that. So I would assume that he's pretty safe to come back. And Mike said as much in the press conference, but I know that was something a pretty big point of interest for Dolphins fans, and I would expect him to come back. There hasn't been anything to suggest otherwise so far. But the season just ended. Obviously, Chris Greer said in his press conference as well that Tua is going to be here long term. And, I don't know. We'll talk about this after we talk about the game and talking about the end of the season to get really in-depth in this. But I know a lot of fans are probably not thrilled with that. And, things do change in the coming months. But, I don't know. When you look at some of the stuff that happened at the end of the year, I don't know. It's a tough decision. And I'm interested to see what ends up happening by the time training camp starts, because I don't know. It's gonna be a wild off season. So let's get into this game. Let's get through this as fast as we can, so we could get into some of the more interesting topics, I think, in terms of things that need to change. But this is a heartbreaking game. I was disappointed, especially with how the offense played. It was very disappointing. The offense felt shackled, whether it was the conditions or because of the quarterback and the way he's played the last few games. I mean, Tua has played really bad the last 3 or 4 weeks of the year, and it wasn't. I mean, even in the Buffalo game, where he didn't play great. He didn't have the game that we needed him to have, and it's very strange that, and this has been a thing through many different games, and ever since my guy here, he rarely puts the game into his hand, and I don't know what that says about Tua, but it's not good. I mean, there's many different. I mean, I remember the first time this happened. That was against the Steelers, where there were very critical downs where he didn't put the game in his hand, and this game, and then obviously would have been harder to do that, but you would think in the second half of that Buffalo game. And who knows if Tyreek Hill catches those passes, what would happen. But even the play against Dallas, where it was a screen pass, it was a pick screen pass. And some of the plays that we ran in Kansas City, it was very conservative, very easy to stop. Really just trying to make magic happen within the play call, not as much as on the field. And that stuff is great against bad teams and who can't execute as well as the good teams. But you need your quarterback to make big throws in big games, and he has to have the ball in his hands. And I don't know what that is really, But, I mean, there have been plays where, they have put the ball in his hands to win games. I mean, the Ravens game is a great example of that. The Chargers game is a great example of that. But we really haven't seen it from him, for at least for the rest of the year. It just was a very disappointing end for Tua down the stretch of the season. Especially the Bills game was very disappointing. Even the Titans game, to a certain extent, was disappointing. And even though the offensive line didn't play as well. But, it just really bad game from Tua in this game. He was 20 for 39, 199 yards, a touchdown and an interception. Just did not throw the ball well. Really struggled to drive it. And, it is what it is. He's not played good football at pretty much the entire month of December and into January, unfortunately, and it was really hard to watch. This offense is too talented to score 7 points, and I know it's weird that people like Omar Kelly are like, why are we even talking about this? It's because he was one of the lackluster parts of the end of the year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if we had lost this game like 20-26, or we had, played well on offense, then it's not even the fact that we lost. It's just how we lost the game is concerning. And just no I mean, and if you look at Tua versus good teams, and the offensive output has been bad. It really has been. And some of that has been on the defense as well. I mean, you think about the Buffalo game is one of the things that comes to my mind immediately. A lot of that had to do with the way the defense just played literally as bad as you could. And we constantly had to make a play on offense, and that just kind of fed into everything else. But we could really never captured momentum in that game. But yeah, I'm very disappointed with how the offense played in this game. They played awful. I mean, everything about it. We couldn't run the ball on a consistent basis. We got dominated at the line of scrimmage in the run game. Although the pass protection was fine, it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It was Austin Jackson's worst game of the year against George Karlaftis. I think he gave up 2 sacks in this game. But they have to address this in some way. And I don't know. Tua has to play better in these moments. And we'll talk more about Tua here in a second. But yeah, it was very disappointing. You can't give up the talent on this offense, and the way that they played football at the end of the season was just so disappointing. So disappointing. And it was hard to watch. And that continued into this game. And they just basically, it was honestly like they didn't even show up. And yeah, and that's what, I mean, we're definitely going to talk about more Tua. Defensively, in this game, they played pretty good. I thought, especially the red zone defense, it sucks to watch them blitz as much as they did in both games to end the season, because we just couldn't get pressure with our front four and really had no shot, and it was kind of getting embarrassing. We sent the same pressure multiple times, and obviously Kansas City's going to have, if you give them an offense the same look multiple times, they're going to have answers for it. And that's what was frustrating about the Bills game as well. And they did, and they burned us pretty bad. But, this wasn't a healthy team by any stretch of the imagination, and on defense, and it showed in this game. I mean, having Justin Houston, it was really sad that Emmanuel Ogbah, was basically, I mean, he is just a shell of himself as a player. He, to have those guys Malik Reed, I felt like those guys took more snaps than he did throughout the entire game, which is embarrassing. Deshaun Elliott is another guy that I want to single out here. Has honestly had a bad year. He has played some good football, but he has blown so many coverages in the red zone. It's honestly a joke, and I do not like the way that he's played football. A lot of blown coverages in the red zone. Obviously communication has been a problem. I mean, you could see Jalen Ramsey yelling at him in this game, and that's on him, man. For real. And he's just not. And you know what? Ever since Javon Holland left, it's really reared its ugly head. So he's been an issue. In terms of players that we rely on, he's not good. And then obviously Duke Riley has to go after the season. I mean, Duke Riley is responsible for definitely at least 28 points in the last few games of the year. Teams have picked on him, and every time we play Buffalo, for whatever reason, it seems like Duke Riley always plays a bunch of time. I don't know why. And he always gets abused. So that has to change. But I want to get into this list because obviously I think it's more interesting. These are the things, in my opinion, I wrote them all down, that I think the Dolphins have to do to become a better football team. And this is something that I've been thinking about. If I did the podcast after this game ended, then, the amount of Tua anger I had was uncontrollable. But we're going to get into some of that stuff now. I don't like the way that, I really don't. There are certain people that cover this team that get on my nerves. And the way Omar Kelly, I was amazed, dude, with some of the stuff that he was saying. You're talking about the most cynical, I don't know, it was just very strange. And rarely, I think people kind of single out, what are the actual issues with this team, and sit down and actually think about, all right, who needs to be replaced. And I thought that I could bring that to this podcast. Yeah, I think these are the things that need to change. So let's get into those things. All right, so and one of the things I want to say before we get into this, very talented team. It was hard to it was very difficult to put these things down. There are some clear weaknesses on this team that it's not just Tua. I know everybody's calling, and honestly, I can't defend the man. He did play pretty bad in these last few games. I mean, it's about as bad as you can play as a quarterback. He didn't turn the ball over I think people overreacting to how bad he played because it wasn't like as bad as it could get, but it was still not great. But anyway, outside of that, I think these are important, and I want to start here. Too deep coverage, and I wrote this down, has been mentioned multiple times throughout the season, and it is a real issue. And Tyreek Hill said, we have to do a better job against too deep looks, and it's real. And I think one of the biggest issues with it is not being able to run the football. And this is why I think the offensive line was average for most of the season, is they couldn't run the ball on too deep looks on a consistent basis against good football teams. They couldn't run the football and push people at the line of scrimmage to really sustain drives at a higher level. That was an issue all season long. So they have to do a better job running the football, and that's clear, and it has been an issue. Huge nugget after the game when Tua was constantly complaining about communication, and he said, the plays take forever to get in, and then when they do, you're motioning, and then by the time you're motioning, there's like 5 seconds left on the clock, and then you have to snap the ball. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, the communication has to be better. I think the way that they call plays has to be different, because Tua doesn't make plays with his legs in terms of scrambling for big chunk yards or being able to keep the play alive at an elite level like Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. Because he can't do that, he needs to be able to beat teams with his brain, and not being able to audible and do more at the line of scrimmage is a big problem. And I think that's something that needs to change next season if he's going to be our quarterback. He has to have more ownership of the line of scrimmage and be able to do more at the line of scrimmage. I think that's a very important thing, and I think that has to be added into the offense. I think that's something that's severely lacking, and it seemed like he was not very happy with it after this game, but he has to do more at the line of scrimmage, because I think that's going to help him and everybody else around him play better and be more consistent on the off, and be a better pocket passer. Catching teams and things, having answers for things you see in the week of preparation and taking advantage of those looks. And they have to trust him more, and he has to do more. And I think, too, the man works really hard. We know that for a fact. And I think he needs to have more ownership of the line of scrimmage, because he really doesn't. Dude, I don't think he's audibled in any of these last 4 games. And you rarely see him do things at the line of scrimmage. And all the great pocket passers throughout the history of the game, that's a huge part of their success. So that needs to change 1,000%. This is something this next thing that they have to change. Very, very annoying. Slot cornerback. Cater Kohu, God bless him, and I know everybody loved him on Hard Knocks, has to change. He has to go. You want to talk about, Shakir, teams attacked him, and they couldn't attack the outside, so they had to attack someone, and Cater Kohu did not hold up. He played about as bad as you can play. I think he had like 150 quarterback rating when quarterbacks target him at the cornerback position, and just use your eyeballs. He gave up so many big plays throughout the year. He honestly has regressed. He has not gotten better. He's a liability in coverage. The best thing that he does is tackle in the open field. And yeah, he has played about as bad as you can at that position. He has to be replaced, I think, with somebody. There were even times when Javon Holland came back that we put him at slot. We put Holland at slot corner because of how bad he's been playing. So that has to change. That's one of the biggest deficiencies of this team, was the slot cornerback position, and that has to change. Middle linebacker is a problem. before the year started, I thought it wasn't an issue. I said that multiple times. I even brought it up that Omar Kelly keeps bringing it up, and I don't know why he does, but I think I've seen enough of it at this point to, especially now that Vic is the defensive coordinator, there really isn't any excuse for them anymore. Someone brought up the graphic of how many yards, basically all of his completions, Josh Allen's completions in our matchups against Buffalo have been in the middle of the field, whether it's against Cater Kohu, who just gets fried against them, or, literally fried. What did he give up, 3 or 4 touchdowns to Stephon Diggs on the road? Even in the game against Miami, he gave up a lot of big plays. You literally fried. Same thing with Duke Riley in the middle linebackers. Even Jerome Baker, when he's been played in some of those games, in those big games, those guys have to play better, and that needs to be upgraded. Clearly, David Long. Now, in terms of priorities, this is probably the last, but I still think it needs to be upgraded, and that has to change. And we have to get someone who is instinctive and a better athlete at that position, and hopefully that happens. Now, granted, year 2 in the system could help someone like a Jerome Baker. I think David Long is I don't think he has to go anywhere. I think he's played great, but the fact that Andrew Van Ginkel had to take snaps at middle linebacker should tell you all you need to know. They need another nickel backer who can play 3 downs in the NFL, because clearly they don't think David Long can do that. Jerome Baker, I just don't. As much as I love him, it would maybe we do something in the draft or do something for someone like a Frankie Louvu. That position needs to be upgraded. I think that's been pretty clear throughout the season. The middle of the field is just, when you have 2 players that, especially down the stretch of the year, players like Duke Riley and Cater Kohu, who are these are the guys that are going to stop teams from throwing in the middle of the field. Clearly, that was one of the reasons we couldn't win games on a high level or get stops or get momentum, was because those 2 are just so below average in their play that it was a massive liability, and that needs to change. This is I think, a huge issue and something that needs to change, and we talked about this last year. It's not that they need a third option, but they need a third receiver, a consistent third receiver and or tight end who can come in and make plays. Anytime Tyreek Hill or Waddle has to leave the game for rest or whatever the issue is, it's a clear drop-off. Braxton Berrios, and especially looking back on it, now Craig Kraft was hurt for most of the year, so who knows what he could have done in this offense as a third option, but clearly Berrios, Chase Claypool, even the Dolphins didn't feel comfortable with their third receiver. Whether it's a tight end, who I think would be a massive addition to the team, I think that's really what they need to do, because this offense could utilize a tight end, especially in the RPO game, in so many different ways, and to get someone who can come in and actually do that at a relatively high level would be a game changer for this offense. So they need a third receiver and or tight end. I think is a big need. It needs to be a priority this year. They need to find whatever it is. It could be a Brock Bowers in the draft. That would be phenomenal. But that clearly, because the guys after Waddle and Hill are not even average. They are below average, especially in man coverage. They were terrible. And that showed on the tape. Chase Claypool is one of the most overrated players, I think, of all time. He is not the answer. So they need to figure that out in some way. But that is a clear need for this team. I mean, you think about Peyton Manning's team or any great pocket, they always had a third option, at receiver. Like Brandon Stokely is a great name to throw out there. Same thing with the Patriots. I mean, they always had a third option at receiver, whether it was Givens or, Deion Branch was, I wouldn't say their third option, or Amendola, anybody like that. Martellus Bennett, stuff like that. It's just too much of a drop off. And the two, Waddle and Hill, run the same route tree, which I think is another issue. They don't really have anybody who can dominate in the middle of the field. Like, their tight ends suck, and our third receiver sucks, our slot receiver. And Waddle never really plays inside for the most part. So they need to get someone who can dominate the middle of the field. And if it's a tight end, or like a Brock Bowers who can get involved in the run game and they can get more creative off of that, that would be a game changer because, again, when those two either leave the game or are not healthy, this offense looks completely different. In the passing game, it's just too much of a drop-off. All right, so there's more on this list that I think needs to change. We talked about that. I wrote this down. Left tackle has to play more. I think the whole offensive line, they need to figure out a way to put a group together that can play 16, 17 games for the first time in the franchise's history in over 15 years. They need to figure it out. Figure it out in the offseason. Chris can totally do it. He needs to prioritize it more. That's a huge need for the growth of this offense to be more consistent because the offensive line isn't consistent. And when the offensive line isn't consistent, your offense isn't going to be consistent. And that's an issue because when they could only get him to play at a certain level, and that's like on the line of average to below average when everybody was hurt. And that's not good enough against the best teams in the NFL and the teams that we have to beat, Buffalo and Kansas City. We have to run the football better, especially when they're in two deep looks. They cannot disrespect our offense like that. And everybody's like, well, why don't they run the football more? Because we can't consistently run the football. I think that, if you want us to run for 15 or 18 rushes for more little yards than that, even in the Buffalo game, we tried to rely on the run, and I think that ended up hurting us more than it helped us. I would have rather seen Tua throw more in the second half than we did. So it's an issue, and they have to fix it. I think the pass protection definitely took a big step in the right direction, though. I think that was noticeably better than last year. The run game was better than last year, but it still wasn't dominant enough. I don't think it was above average or even at average on a consistent basis. Special teams was bad. It lost us an AFC East championship, and that's all I really need to say about that. But it was really bad, I thought, the entire year. Jason Sanders was pretty inconsistent, and Jake Bailey was just like so high and low, peaks and valleys. The coverage team is too old. Justin Bethel, if you guys go back and I don't even go back and watch the Hardy return. But that was that looked like an 80-year-old trying to tackle a 20-year-old and on Thanksgiving dinner. So that was bad. So that has to, the Gunners, all of that stuff has to change. Berrios, I think, was the best part of the special teams. He was the most consistent part. He did a good job of always kind of doing his best to get us good field position. But even the blocking on returns, especially in the punt game, was very underwhelming and needs to be better. So hopefully we can somehow maybe get younger there in some way. I don't know. We talked about O-line being average and needs to be more consistent. Quarterback play was bad at the end of the year. It was very disappointing. I'm very disappointed in Tua. I have higher expectations for him. That was not it. And I think one of the issues that in his game that he has to get better at, he has to trust his offensive line more, because even in that Buffalo game, it felt like his internal clock was hurried. He wasn't going through his entire progressions at times. And he is and I know people are like, oh, he's a one-read quarterback. I don't even know who started that, because that's not true. Just watch the film. Out of everything that Tua has a deficiency at, that is not one of those things. That is not an issue. But he has to trust his offensive line more, and take more time with plays than he does. He is the quarterback who, he gets the ball out quicker more than any other team, and a lot of plays are designed to get the ball out quick. We have to do we have to go into next season believing that our guys can block their guys. And I just don't think the Dolphins as an organization believe that sometimes. And I think that's the reason why some of the game plans are crafted the way that they are. And Tua in the pocket has to do a better job of just trusting his protection, because clearly that has been an issue. Some of the other things that Tua does is he has to be more consistent at driving the football, especially at the end of the season. That has been an issue, and very noticeable throughout the entire game. So those things have to change. I think those are the three biggest things in Tua's game that have to be better. He has to have more control at the line of scrimmage. He has to, and I think the play calling has to reflect that we can trust that our guys can block them, and he has to be more consistent at driving the football because some of his throws can kind of get sloppy at times. The throw that he made in Buffalo, I know people are, he doesn't have a strong arm. We've seen him make throws down the field that are better than some of the quality throws that he had in that game. And I've seen him do it. I know he can do it. And it's just weird that the quality of the football sometimes is just way too up and down. And that has to change. Need a better third running back. I don't even think Jeff Wilson would have taken any carries other than maybe on third down to do some pass protection stuff. But Chris Brooks, I think it has a future with the team. So I don't think that's necessarily something they have to go actively look for, because he is a power back, and it would be nice to have someone who can kind of get a little bit dirtier. But Jeff Wilson isn't the answer, and I think the team needs to move on from him. It's criminal that Jeff Wilson had more carries than Devon Achane against Buffalo. That's a criminal. That should be a felony, and that was criminal, to say the least. The last thing I wrote down in terms of changes that could happen, that need to happen. We all know that the draft this year is a very good quarterback draft. Now, I'm not happy with the way that Tua played down the stretch of these games. I think there's definitely room for improvement for all the things we just listed. I think the line of scrimmage thing is the biggest thing. I think building a better offensive line, I think we'll see better, more consistency from not only the game plan, but the offense itself. Because I really don't think they trusted the offensive line in a lot of these games, and they shouldn't have. Because I think, especially with Armstead being in and out all the dang time, and the guard play being sometimes really bad, I don't think they consistently thought we could block another team, a very good team. I'm talking about the best team. I'm not talking about trash teams. I'm talking about good teams. I don't think they believed that. So that has to change. But, and getting, letting him have more to do with the line of scrimmage, I think would be we don't always have to motion all the time. We could let Tua run the offense to a certain extent at times in games, especially on the road, or even at home. So I think that's something that has to change. But, I look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They had the 27th pick in the draft. They traded all the way up to 10. We have the 21st pick in the draft. There's a lot of good quarterback prospects. I know a lot of people think Fields, but I think Tua, at this stage of his career, is a much better quarterback than Justin Fields. So I don't know if necessarily that's something that they could do. Because the depth of this draft at quarterback, maybe you could argue they should take one and then play Tua for the season under the fifth-year option and see where things go with the development of the quarterback or Tua himself. And who knows what they'll do. I think there's a lot of good players in this draft at the quarterback position. Jaden Daniels is a player that would be a very interesting prospect, especially in this scheme, in the talent that's on this team. And I just wrote down the Kansas City Chiefs model and what they did with Alex Smith. And that's something that the Dolphins could recreate here in Miami if they felt the need to. I think the deficiencies of Tua's game, you talk about the modern NFL, in terms of making plays that aren't there outside of the pocket, is really the only thing that you could point out. And maybe they want more of that out of their quarterback. And certainly the fans do. And maybe that's something that they consider, because the play of the quarterback position down the stretch of Tua, down the stretch of the season, was unacceptable and very, honestly surprising to me, at least. I didn't think he, especially in Miami, having that bad of a game was surprising. And it wasn't his fault, because receiver, again, after Hill, it's not even average. It's below average receiver play. And it's not just Tua. I still think, and trust me, I didn't think this after the Chiefs game. I was so upset. But after thinking about it, I think there is still, I still think he can be the guy that wins this playoff game and could win us a championship. I don't think I'm off that yet. I don't think I'm full Alex Smith, like, oh, this guy can't do it yet, because I still think there are still deficiencies that we just discussed that the team can get better at, and I think we'll get the results that we want. Does that change the fact that, the things that I think concern me is we actually pass protected good, and the Buffalo game is, I think, the biggest concern, is because we pass protected at home. The weather was a non-fact. That didn't have anything to do with it, and he still didn't play great, and I think that's an issue. But there are still things that Tua does at a very high level that not other quarterbacks. I mean, he led the league in passing. He throws with great anticipation and accuracy. He does read defenses at a high level. And that's why I think he needs to have more power at the line of scrimmage. But I don't think he studies hard. He works hard. So I'm not completely ready to say that he needs to be replaced and things are going to get exponentially better. But I would not be opposed to drafting someone who is the opposite of Tua to come in and compete. And maybe you see how someone like that, if they can run the offense, and who knows? I mean, obviously a player like Jaden Daniels could elevate the play of an offensive line. I mean, Tua did the best that he could with the way he can anticipate, get the ball out of his hands, and read defenses. He did the best that he could at that, elevating a better. But he needs a better offensive line to be more consistent, and so does the offensive as a whole. So those are all considerations. We went through things that they need to change. I think Caterco has to go. I mean, we talked about it. The middle of the field on defense has to be better. I swear to God, if they don't get someone who can play tight end or the third, like a true slot guy who's had success at it, not someone like Barrios who's never been a good slot receiver coming in, they need someone there who can play better in the middle of the field and dominate that port. Because granted, we do run a lot of stuff in the middle of the field. We don't do well with intermediate to short routes, and a lot of everything's on the outside with Tua or Tyreek and Waddle. The slot is a position that needs to be better. I mean, even when Craycraft comes in, he's on the outside. Like, he doesn't play inside all that much. So that needs to change. But there's still this, it was really hard, and I think that's a lot of the reason why people are on Tua, is because there's not a lot that they can do to improve the team as a whole, other than the 3-4 things that we discussed. Even like slot corner, middle linebacker, stuff like that. Obviously, that stuff needs to change. But again, the roster is great. And the blame has to fall somewhere. But the team did still win 11 games despite all of the injuries. And who knows? I think if we were healthy, I don't even think that game in Buffalo, the game that we had against Buffalo and Miami, would have been close. I really do believe that. I think we would have won that game. I really do believe that. We also got unlucky in that game. I mean, the ball pops up and just lands in Sherfield's hand. I mean, stuff like that. So I think we can win this division still. I really do. The way that it has the landscape is now, even with Tua, but those things have to get better if we're going to beat teams on the road and be good teams, whether it's on the road or at home. There's still room for improvement. I think those are the things that they need to do to improve. And maybe there is a chance the Dolphins can do something within the draft. And I know some of you think Fields is a better option. And I think there definitely is an argument against that. But I think those are the things that they need to get better. I think for sure those are the things they need. Outside of Tua, those are the things they have to get better at. Whether it's a tight end or a third option or receiver, the offensive line has to be solidified. He needs to get more control at the line of scrimmage. And middle linebacker, slot corner have to be better for us to improve next season. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, and we need to get rid of Jeff Wilson, and someone has to play third running back. Derrick Henry. So that I think would be a little bit too much, because we don't need a big name there. And like I said, I think Chris Brooks can and will fill that role. And maybe they get someone in the draft that in the late rounds that can come in and do that. But that needs to be better as well. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. It was a great year. There were so many great moments. I think the most disappointing thing to me is the way that Tua played at the end of the year. It was very disappointing. He did not play up to even his standard. And he's beaten and played well against good teams before. The Ravens, when they were healthy at the beginning of last year, the Chargers are a good football team, and they were obviously, that was at the beginning of the season, and he played good in that game as well. I thought he played really well against the Cowboys. He made a lot of big throws in that game. He has to play better against better teams, and I know that's such a blanket statement, and it's not really that detailed, and I think the reasons I just said, I think is the reason our offense struggled against good teams. Not trusting the offensive line, not trusting the offensive line, not letting him have more control at the line of scrimmage, not being able to run the ball on a consistent basis, the deficiencies at the receiver position. I don't think people even asking Mike McDaniel, should you call plays, I think is a stupid question, because for whatever reason, whether it was the offensive line or Tua, the offense at the end of the season was shackled. It wasn't as open as it was at the beginning of the year, and whether that was injuries or whatever it was, that's something that they're gonna have to figure out. And yeah, Tua not being trusted at times at the end of this season is very strange, and they have to look into that. And like I said, there are times where he has had the ball in his hands to win the game, and he's come through. But clearly the offense was shackled at the end of the year, and for whatever reason, and I'm not in the play calling meetings and game plan meetings, so I can't tell you guys, but whether it was Tua or the offensive line, I don't know, but it has to be one of the two. And they have to figure those things out. But just very disappointed in Tua and the way that the team played as an offense at the end of the year. They just you can't be that dominant on that side of the football and then just lose it all like they did. They have to figure that out, and I hope that and I believe that we will. And like I said, I don't think Tua necessarily is. I still think, like I said, we can win a championship with him. But there are things that have to get better around him still. I think that was very clear this year, and all the reasons that we said. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed one of the longer episodes we've had in a long time. But I'm excited for the off season. I hate to even, it hurts my heart that we didn't win a playoff game. Didn't win the division. I mean, literally, I was depressed and couldn't stop thinking about it. Still am. Still bothers me, and still think about it a lot, and all the things that went wrong this year. Very, very, it sucks. It really does. But hopefully we can improve upon the things that we need to improve upon. We can't go another year with the way, we just cannot be satisfied with the offensive line, and especially with Armstead retiring, and hopefully that triggers some sort of urgency to get that done, and to have a more consistent offensive line is an issue. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.